Hello Multiverse, welcome to Omniverse Gamers. My name is Damian Bazzaio. This video is going to talk about terrain and how to use it effectively. Now, a lot of DMs tell other DMs all the time, use terrain. Terrain's very important in your encounter. But what is terrain and how do you actually do that? I mean, there's you can be in a swamp, you can be in a snowy land, you can be on a hill, but it doesn't really mean anything unless you make it something. Terrain is not a backdrop. The official definition of terrain is a stretch of land, especially the physical attributes of that land. That's what terrain means, like the tundra or the desert or the forest or the swamp. There's various types of terrain in the actual definition. But how that pertains to Dungeons and Dragons, really, in my mind, terrain in Dungeons and Dragons or in any role-playing game is pretty much anything in a scene or setting that's not a creature. And even sometimes a creature can be part of the terrain. Like I have one where you're on the back of a turtle, or there's sometimes a creature like pushes through the terrain. The creature is the one making the terrain as it goes. So it's not really a terrain feature, but it is a factor in the terrain. So it's a lot more broad definition than just, swamps, hills, things like that we would say normal world definitions. So the ways to make this relevant to combat is you can't just think about the terrain as a backdrop. It has to be an active player. If your terrain is an active player in the game, in the situation, in the scene, it's going to be way more dynamic and way more fun of a combat. And it's not enough to just have terrain. You have to use terrain. Like a lot of people, I set up terrain, and I had cover, and I had trees, and I had a river, and I had difficult terrain, and the players just went to the center and attacked the monster. They didn't even use the terrain that I set up. Well, yes, because you didn't force them to. They don't have to. If they can just run in, like the 5th edition D&D combat is a white plane, like a matrix room, where there's combat, you go in the center and you just attack, or people stay at range. Everyone stays at the best spot they can be, and rolls dice. That's the optimal way that's the optimal way to achieve success in 5th edition combat. So as a DM, you have to be the one to push the combat around. You have to change the terrain, change the battlefield control, change things that make the players have to move. Like don't just I have cover, they didn't use it. Like, well, maybe your goblins should use the cover. Basically have a plan. My goblins are going to come out of this cover, shoot, jump back down to full cover. So the party can't just stay back there. They have to move around the cover to even get anyone to attack. They can't. They can ready their actions when they pop out, but that's not optimal. You have to have a plan. Basically, have a plan of how you're going to use this terrain. Now, there's a couple different ways to use terrain. There's a couple different types of terrain, I guess I should say. There's like the big set pieces, like the Indiana Jones, when the boulder comes, or like he's going to walk across the bridge and the bridge will cut and then he falls. That's a set piece. That's part of the scene. Like Uncharted is full of set pieces. The whole world is set up to fall down underneath you, and you have to grab a ledge, or things are going to happen that are going to force you to act quickly. That's called a set piece. It's a big, like Hollywood does it all the time. Any action movie is full of like dozens of set pieces that are just ready to go. Fast and the Furious, the set pieces, the cars driving. It's a terrain drama technique that you have pre-planned. It's going to happen at some point during the combat. This set piece is going to trigger and things are going to go down. And I'm going to give you some examples of these later in the video. I'm just trying to define the different types of terrain use to start here. So there's also things like there's habitats, monster tactics. Like you can have a forest that doesn't move, it doesn't have to change, but the monsters themselves don't just be like, I'm going to put some kobolds in this forest. Well, okay, is this their home forest? Do they have like little tunnels? Do they have ways to defend themselves? Do they have things that they use in this habitat to protect themselves? Is that why they're living here? It's defensible, or it's because of food, or why are they in this terrain? That'll help you design terrain that monsters can use to their advantage. And then there's things like moving terrain, like that's not quite a set piece, but it's just like a river, a moving river, or like if you're on a boat and you're just sailing on the ocean. That's moving terrain. The ocean is moving; it's constantly moving. Or like a sand slide. Like I had one where I had a sand slide, and they're just going down the sand hill that's just like kind of sliding down. And I'll explain that encounter a little bit later in my examples. But that's another example of like the sand below them is moving towards something dangerous, and they have to climb the sand as they fight. And it was a whole big. That's a way to use moving terrain. And then there's terrain where the monsters are creating the terrain, or the monsters are doing things that are causing terrain changes, like the one with Troll Bridge. There was a bridge, and the trolls were ripping the bridge down, so the bridge is being destroyed, but they're also using the bridge and throwing it at the players. So the monsters are physically changing the terrain. And there's one where I have a sandworm. The sandworm's digging holes and going underneath, grabbing people in their mouth, going underground, digging tunnels. So the sandworm's creating the terrain as he goes. And then there's one I'll show you. My best encounter recently was Donkey Kong, Goblin Donkey Kong, and it's just this big like strip mine circle, and they come up from the bottom, and the goblins are throwing stones down at them, and they're rolling. So the terrain the monsters are making the terrain dangerous. The terrain itself is just a you know a circular. The terrain itself is just a circular like spiral that's rising ascension. You know what I mean? It's kind of like going up. But because the goblins are throwing rocks down the spiral, they're creating the terrain Donkey Kong style. So you can see how in all those examples, when I don't just put terrain down, I plan how I'm going to use that. So you think about the terrain first, then you're like, well, how can my monsters use this? How can I use this to my advantage? How can I, how can I make the terrain work? So let me go through some examples here, and I'll try to give. I have some of these I have video packages for. Some of these I just have. I'm just going to explain to you. But so first we're going to do set pieces because that's the easiest one to plan ahead for. So here's some examples of some set pieces. Like here's one Goblin Bridge. So they're on one side of the bridge. Players are here, and the goblins are all over here defending themselves. Then there's this bridge in between. Now I know part of my set piece. As soon as the players start crossing this bridge, I'm going to cut the bridge. As soon as I need 2, maybe 3 of them on the bridge, and I'm going to cut that bridge. So I know in my mind that's my set piece. When they get on the bridge, the goblins that are stationed at the other side are just going to chop it, and they're going to fall. And sometimes it works. My players kind of in this counter they bypass. 2 of my players were able to jump and bypass and used various tools they had to get around the bridge, but the rest of them had to cross the bridge. And when they did, I chopped the bridge. The bridge fell. They had to do. One guy had a grappling hook, and they dealt with it. But that rather than just fighting goblins across this cavern, that set piece made drama. It created the drama, and that was a plan. I planned that out. It wasn't for a set time. It's just when I feel it, when I can get the most out of it, I'm going to cut that bridge. Another example of a set piece is here's a different kind of example. This is a rowboat. There's a party of 3 second level characters in this rowboat with 2 innocent people, and it's kind of like this weird roleplay thing going on, but there's a massive giant shark underneath the boat. Now, second level characters cannot fight a massive shark. I mean, they can, but that's not going to go well for them. But my shark did not fight them at all. The shark just kept hitting the boat, and the boat would rock, and they'd take damage. And they were shooting the boat they were shooting the shark with their magic. But as they're going along the ocean, the set piece was the boat. And my big coup de grace, the monster, I think it was round 3, the monster came through and took the boat right out. Took the boat right in half. And I had in Roll20, I had set up 3 pieces. I had the whole boat. Then I had the little section at the top, and I had the little section at the bottom, and I cut out the middle. So I had 3 pieces, the big one, and the 2 were in the middle. But when the boat came through and took out the middle, I just took out that big piece. So the boat was literally in 2 pieces, and they were in the water in between. Now they're floating in the water while the shark's in there, and they're just like, holy crap, and they do their best to get up into the rowboat. And so that's an example of the terrain was the enemy. The shark was there, but the shark did not directly attack the party at all. The shark was just there to facilitate my set piece of the boat being knocked out. And like I said, I didn't attack them at all, but I dealt them damage from rocking and various things, and they were scared. They were scared as hell because they're trapped in a rowboat with a massive shark that's way overpowered. So that was just another example of a set piece. Here's another set piece. This is they were all captured by Joe Elves, and I had them in this little net that it's a magical net, and my goal was to start this campaign with them escaping from this magical net. And one of the guys in the net with them, this NPC, had a little a magic EMP, kind of like a magic pulse. So they were being transported by Dark Elf slavers through this tunnel. So even if they escape, there's nowhere to go. But up ahead, they sense that there's a waterfall and there's a bridge going on, a magical bridge made of magic. The bridge was literally made of magic. So they knew when they hit that EMP pulse, the anti-magic pulse, that not only was the net going to be able to be non-magical and they can get out of it, but the bridge that they were going to be on was going to disappear and they were all going to tumble down below, which wasn't optimal for them, but it's better than being trapped and brought to Dark Elf. Once they get to the city and then they're surrounded, they're done. So this was their one chance to escape. And the way I described it, they knew. So they hit that AMP pulse with their NPC. They caused the set piece. I just literally pulled the bridge out, and they all fell down in the water. And now this water was rushing river, and the rushing river pushing them to the west, where there's a big zombie shark coming at them. So they not only did they fall the set piece, but now the water, now there's also moving terrain that's pushing them towards more danger, and they have to swim against it and fight the people that are with them. That was a big chaotic battle that was all facilitated by a set piece and a moving terrain. Some of these will overlap because terrain is what it is. Sometimes you use multiple. If you use multiple techniques in the same encounter, you're just adding to the drama and the dynamics of the counter. So here's some examples of monster tactics that use the terrain that static terrain that you put down. It doesn't have to be static; it can change and stuff. But the monsters are utilizing the terrain. You don't just put down. Like here's one I just put. It's a forest. You just put guys in a forest. Great, you're in a forest, but what does that do? It cuts cover, it does things. So what I did is I added these dryads, and these dryads can tree step 60 feet. So when I put down my forest, I purposely put my trees less than 60 feet from each other, so that the dryads can just zip, 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 zip to them. So when the players went to hit them, they could zip away. Now they would get attacks of opportunity, but still the players would have to zip 60 feet away. Now the player has to chase that dryad, who can just as easily zip back to that tree. So it turned this one combat into just like attacking to where the Dryad's going to go. We have to anticipate. The Dryads had a plan how to use they knew how to use their own terrain. And that's an example of the monster tactics using the terrain. Here's another one here, Scorpion Pitfall. This is a 2-dimensional combat on a flat plane, but I drew it kind of in perspective, so there was a pit. So not only is there a pit there, but I had a plan. I didn't just have a pit. Oh, there's a pit of scorpions. You can just run away. They have to get past the scorpions to the other side. That's their goal. And the scorpions can run 40 feet. Players can run 30 feet. So even if they run away, scorpions see them. The scorpions are gonna catch them. So they kind of have to engage in this combat. So the way I used the terrain was when they got close, my goal was I gave the scorpions athletics. My plan was the scorpions, this is their pit, their mama's down and below, all these little minions. Their goal is to grab the people off the ledge and yank them, and they fall 40 feet, take damage, and then the mom comes in and grabs them. So my goal with this is terrain that my monsters have a plan for. Their plan is to yank them out into the pit, then they're stuck in the pit. Then they have no choice but to fight in this pit. So there's all kinds of ways to use your terrain. Here's one of my best encounters ever, Mega Octopus Cavern. They go into this cavern where they're above water, but then they have to go underwater. This octopus comes and fights them on the land from the water with tentacles, and they do some damage to it, but then the octopus retreats underwater. So now they have to go underwater to fight this octopus if they want to, but what they have to do, they have to kill this thing because they're trying to find clues to whatever, blah, blah, blah. There's a reason they have to fight it. But they have to go into the water, and now the first fight was on the land, and he kind of fought with his tentacles outside. But now when they go in the water, they're in his habitat. So he knows how to fight underwater. He's staying down below, getting covered from the water, so the archers can't quite get him from above. It's hard. And the two that are swimming are getting engulfed, and I'm using my ink spray, and then they eventually do enough damage that he uses his own habitat to do ink spray, and he escapes again, and he goes down even lower into the underwater, into the next chamber. So they have to go follow him and stalk him based on his bleeding. And so now I'm using his terrain. He's leading them into his homeland, and they go into the tunnel, and he's waiting right behind the wall of this tunnel. And when they come in, he is now this battle has escalated because now they're in his home, and he's using underwater, using tentacles and wrapping. So he's not really using the terrain against the party. He's using it to his own advantage for his own tactics to get away and to attack and flee. He's using his own habitat in his own way. So here's some examples of some moving terrain that's moving as you go. So here's kobold gnolls at sea. This is a simple one. They're on a rope. They're on a boat. They're at sea. These kobold things come kind of passing through. They're going to an island to get some treasure that they have to find, these little plate things that they're trying to find. And here comes, before they get to the island, here comes these kobold gnoll things that I invented. You can go look at the encounter and see all that. I don't want to get into that right now because this is about terrain, but go check out that kobold encounter. So the kobolds come through, and now they have a decision. They're like, and the kobolds are holding some of the plates, some of the treasure they need. So they just stole it from the place. They're gonna go. So like, oh man, we got to go chase them. So now they are chasing these kobolds through the ocean, and then the kobolds bring them to this island area where they know their allies are all put up on these islands tactically. So as the kobold gnolls bring them through, and they're on their rowboat, they now are dealing with these islands and these kobolds and the different strategies, and they get boarded. So this terrain, the terrain is their boat and the ocean and the islands don't move, but the boat moves around them, and so this is an example of moving terrain. Another example, like I mentioned earlier, I had a game where I wanted to start them in a different world, whole different world, and I wanted them to die. So the first thing that happened was they got crushed in a landslide, and then like this in their normal world, they were at a party, and the landslide came and crushed them in sand. So they died, but then this god said, "No, you're not going to die. You're going to, we need you to we need you to help solve things anyway." So they got plopped down into the sand pit, and the sand pit was, because they died of sand, so it's like a representation of how they died. And the sand pit was sliding down towards the gates of hell. At the bottom here was the gates of hell, and Cerberus, three-headed dog, was right there breathing fire at the bottom. The sand was kind of going right, it wasn't coming into the gates, but right losing itself right in front of the gate. That was somewhere the sand was going. So when the party hits the sand, they're being slid down the sand, and they're making athletics checks to try not to get pulled towards Cerberus, so they have to fight upward. And I have the Yogi and other things in the sand fighting them. And at the top of the sand pit is a portal, and they're like, they're kind of like the god that had to save them. If you can get here to save your souls, and we can, so they know if they can get up to that, they're basically fighting for their lives. If they just sink down to Cerberus and the hell, they're dead. They're undead. They're dead. If they can fight their way up this sand pit, it's tough because athletic checks are hard. They can help each other. They can throw each other, and the stronger people obviously have a better chance. But this moving terrain is just sweeping them down, causing constant every round. They're sweeping down more. So that's just an example of how you can use terrain that's moving to keep drama. Have you're moving along the ocean, you're doing a chase, or you're doing something like that. Like I said, all those examples. You're on a river, it's a moving terrain. You have to get past it without getting swept away. I just did one recently where it was a skill challenge where they were on an ice block, a bunch of ice jam. We get them a lot around here. So it's when the ice freezes, but then the water it melts and it pushes the ice blocks up out of the river because it pushes them and they break. And they go swinging down the river and cause like destruction and stuff. So I had the players, they were kind of bouncing off that. That's an example of moving terrain. That was just a skill challenge to try to not die. They weren't fighting anything. They were just trying to survive that natural disaster. And then, like I said, there are terrain changes that are monsters that cause terrain changes. So as you can see here, the troll bridge, I put the misses a bit. It's kind of a set piece because I built it up. But the trolls, it's not one thing that's just going to happen. The trolls are literally smashing the bridge. I'm representing it with these dominoes. And they're picking up pieces of the bridge and throwing it at the party. They're dropping it down on the party. So the monsters are creating this terrain difference. You know what I mean? Just like here's another one. Here's Sandworm Plateau. They go up on this plateau. It's this big, tall plateau. In my mind, the sandworm was digging holes underneath. And it pops up and grabs at the barbarian and gets him inside of his mouth. And then it goes back down underground. And it's this big, long thing creating tunnels. So it's creating tunnels and terrain and areas and popping back out, and they attack it, and it's creating more tunnels. So even though it's just a flat plateau, as this creature moves through it, it creates these terrain features, difficult terrain and the tunnels and all that. And here's another example of how monsters can make terrain change. Here's one where they start at the bottom, and they have to get up this spiral, and they already realize that it's a kill zone because they're going up this 40, 50 feet. These goblins are just raining arrows. They're in a kill zone. And there's a spiral going up. But as they start moving, the goblins start rolling boulders down so they're rolling down, slowly down, so all these boulders are coming at them. So the terrain is constantly changing because where they can stand is not so, it's okay right now, but now this section's dangerous, so we can't stay here. So that's an example of, now this is just a normal combat with, it's a two-dimensional drawing, but it's a three-dimensional combat because of the way I described the spiral and the way I have it positioned and the way the boulders are rolling. The monsters are creating this. The terrain is already kind of dynamic in its own because of the kill zone, but the fact that the boulders are coming and the monsters are shooting them, they're just creating different terrain options. And now they can shoot those guys that are rolling the boulders, or they can try to deflect the boulders. There's all kinds of ways for the players to change this kind of terrain. So I hope that was interesting. That was just kind of a way to show you some practical ways to use terrain instead of just saying like use terrain, use terrain. These are examples on how to actually effectively use it. And like I said, have a plan. Know the 4 different types of terrain, set pieces, the monster tactics that use their habitat, the moving terrain that's on its own, and then monsters that cause terrain to change. And you can combinations in between. If you can use all 4 in one terrain, then great. Your setup is going to be amazing. If you get 2, one of them, it doesn't really matter. It's weird because you don't have to add a lot to like I said, 5th edition is a flat matrix, flat white plain combat. It doesn't take much to add to that. As long as you have some motivations and some exposition and why you're doing everything. The tiniest little thing like that rock coming down changes everything, or the water just pushing through, or like a tidal wave, or even a rock up, like a troll throwing a boulder right down the center. That's something that's enough. Or the dryads using the trees to bounce around. It only takes one thing to make it dynamic. You just have to keep it going and keep it planned. But there's infinite ways to implement it and make it work and make it exciting. So I hope that was interesting. Hope that helps you guys use terrain a little bit. I probably should, as you said, check out all the examples to all those encounters in my Dissecting Dynamic Encounters series. I'll leave the link to that down below. All my encounters have either a terrain factor or a something that the monsters are doing to make the combat shift at a certain point. So hopefully that can give you guys some examples in your own games to help you use terrain effectively and make your combats really cool and make your habitats for your monsters all kind of blend together and make it all count. So yeah, we are Omniverse Gamers. Like, subscribe. Hope to see you soon, and keep on gaming.